All right, ICS4U, here's another type of loop, the for loop. You've seen it probably in grade 11 in Python or whatever language we were using, and now we're going to see it in Java. It is a little bit different in Java. In IntelliJ, I'll just show you an example now. So from IntelliJ, I've already created a new project called for loops, and I'll create my main method. Didn't do that yet. Public static void main. And so for loops have three parts. You're going to do it with the word for, and then we're going to have brackets. And there's three parts that go inside of the bracket. I'm going to put the body. So there's the loop body. And we probably want it like that. But the for loop has three parts, and they're separated by semicolons. So you can put in two semicolons. There's three spots there. The first spot is the initialization, the initial value of the counter variable. You can declare your counter variable inside of the for loop too, and that's often done. So this is how we would do that. We'd say int, probably going to use an int most of the time. I'll say c, set it equal to 0. So that's my variable that is initialized and given its first value of 0, starting point. The middle part is the continuation condition. So it's just like in the while loop when you have your condition in the while loop. Under what situation will the loop continue to proceed or loop again? So in this case, we want it to continue to loop while c is less than 10. As long as c is less than 10, we'll continue to loop. And finally, the last part is the counter rule. The increment or decrement rule, I also call, or the change rule, you might hear it called that. So C++, and we're already familiar with C++, that's the same as C equals C plus 1. I'm just going to put a comment here. C++ is the same as C equals C plus 1. Okay, notice so that's the for loop. And now if we say print out the value of C, why don't we just print it out with not print line, just print, and try running it and see that we get all of the values. I'm going to actually do this. Put a plus sign and then a space after each number. And it should go on the same line. So we'll run it. And I have a small error there. What did I do wrong now? Let's see. Curly braces. So I have curly braces matching up for the for loop. And I don't have a curly brace really for the main method. So there's my curly brace for the main method. And now I have one for the class at so we have the class on the outer level, the main method inside that, and inside that we have a for loop. So now we'll try running it. We should get some there we go. So you can see the output 0, 1, 2, 3 all the way up to 9. So there's your for loop. I'm going to have a supporting document that explains the starting value, which is int c equals 0 is what we have as our example. The continuation condition, c less than 10 in our case. Finally, the update rule, C++. All right, so there's an example of for loops. You can also decrease your for loop, go down, start counting downwards. So let's say that we wanted to, I'll just make another for loop controlled by D. And I'm going to show you, in this case, I'm going to just make a value called, I'm going to declare my variable outside of the loop. Just to show you that you can do this. There's some situations where you may want to do this, and it is possible to do that. So for, and in that case, you wouldn't put int d. That'll give you an error because d is, you can see there's a red thing coming up there. So I want to start it at 100. Let's see what happens when we do this. D greater than 0, we want to continue to loop as long as it's greater than 0 because we started at 100, we want to be counting down. And then finally d minus minus. D minus minus is the same as d equals d minus 1. Put our curly braces, and this time they match up correctly. System.out.print d. You can see there's an error on d. If I hover over it, it says variable d is already defined in this scope. So we will talk about scope later on. There's a scope inside of the for loop. If something is declared inside of the for loop, for example, this first for loop where we used c, where we say int c inside of the for loop, the scope for that variable c is only inside of the for loop because it's declared inside of the for loop. However, by declaring the value d outside of the for loop, in the second for loop here. That means it's valid not only inside the for loop, but also outside the for loop. I'm going to run this first, just to show you that it can count downwards as well. And so, oops, okay, let's do something a bit better here. Plus spaces. I'm also going to put a print line statement here, just so that it does an empty line between the two, and try running it again. The output will look more, you'll be able to see it better. So, and still I meant to put a space there. Let's try it again. So our first for loop counts from 0 to 9. Our second for loop starts, you can see it starts at 100, starts counting downwards, and it goes all the way down to 1. I don't think it reaches 0 because we say only loop while d is greater than 0. Okay, what I wanted to show you now is this whole thing about scope. So if I try to access, let's say that I tried to print out the value of c outside of the for loop. So you can see that the variable c is defined, it's declared, sorry. The variable c is declared inside of the first for loop. If I try to print it outside of the first for loop, first of all, you can see it's red. It says cannot resolve symbol c, because c does not exist outside of the for loop. Okay, so I'm going to get rid of that c. However, if I go down to the bottom of the for loop, the second for loop, system.out.println d, there's no problem. It can print the value of d, and that's because we declared d outside of the for loop. So the scope of d is the main method, and well, the for loop's inside the main method, which is fine. Okay, so that's scope. That's the end of for loops. I think it's just a crash course in for loops, but you've seen for loops before. We should be good. And I do want to show you one other kind of loop, but I'll make it another lesson. Do while loops will be coming next.